for the next level in entertainment. Sky Cable's Evo Box is the latest product that lets you access over 190 channels, built-in streaming apps, and more than 5,000 downloadable apps and games. Get yours now at mysky.com.ph/skyevo or visit the Sky Zones in Ayala Center and Gaisano Grand Mall, Lapu-Lapu.
I'm Jobert Otto, and today we speak with a lawyer, an educator, and a specialist at the World Bank who in 2020 was awarded one of the Philippines' outstanding young men. Please welcome to Power Women, Attorney Lesley Cordero. Attorney Cordero, thank you for joining us and happy International Women's Month to you.
Thank you, Jobert. Thank you to Freeman, and it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation.
The last time you're home, because you are, of course, from Cebu.
Right. A long time. So it was, I think, December of 2019, right before the lockdown.
And 2020 happened, no?
Right.
Glad to see that you're safe and sound there in Manila. By the way, on the TOYM award in 2020. My first question will have to be, because just a piece of trivia also, you are a philosophy graduate at the University of San Carlos here in Cebu, a lawyer, but how did you get into disaster risk management?
Yeah, interesting question. Started when I worked in government back in 2010. And it was, I think, a call because of the events that happened. So there was Typhoon Pablo in 2012. There was Typhoon Yolanda in 2013. So at the Office of the President, help different departments work together and deliver. So it was a natural course when there was a task force that was created. So I started there and I embraced it, every aspect of it, whether it's coordination, it's disaster response and relief operations, preparing communities and local government units, and of course, the rehabilitation and recovery efforts.
What made you interested to get into government, by the way?
It was more of, I could still recall, there was a career talk we had in the University of San Carlos. And there was one lady who portrayed interesting, exciting. It was an adventure. So I digged in right after law school. And lo and behold, I got the shock of my life. It was both challenging, interesting, as well as very different from how it is romanticized televisions, in movies. Yeah.
Can you expound? Can we ask you to expound a little bit more about that shock you experienced when entering government?
Yeah. So I started back in 2010 with the Presidential Communications Operations Office, or PCOO. So I started as a legal and legislative officer, and then I was promoted to undersecretary. And the goal there was to oversee most of the government mass media channels. You're talking about RPN 9, PTV4, IBC 13. You're talking about the Philippine Information Agency. And a large chunk of that also was the Media Board, the Film Development Council of the Philippines, as well as the Movie Television Review and Classification Board. So it was something different, it was something exciting. It was setting the tone, the policies. And then I was asked to move to the Office of the Cabinet Secretary. It was with Secretary Rene Almendras. And it was there where I was exposed to disaster, Typhoon Pablo, managing the cabinet assistance system. These are undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, senior officials in the different agencies. And the goal was to make them talk to each other, to move delayed policies moving as priority programs of the Office of the President. And then another exciting bit there was the Sadyahatra Bangsamoro. This was the prelude to this whole BARM and the Basic Organic Law. And it was putting in programs and projects on education, health, livelihood for the MILF then, before they joined government. And then 2013 happened, Typhoon Haiyan, by far, yeah, the strongest typhoon that made landfall, not just in the Philippines, but in the whole world. So at that time, the whole world was watching as countries were ready to parachute come in and help. And Cebu was affected. Northern part of Cebu, you have Bogo, you have Bantayan. And there I saw that even if government prepared as much as it can, no one expected the level of devastation and the impact of that disaster. And you also see the resilience and the bayanihan spirit of the Filipinos. For one, I saw how the Cebuanos bonded together and made sure that each one was helping each other and helping Northern Cebu instead of waiting for national government to come in.
What kind of pressure was that like for you? Being a young person in government, already responding to a huge challenge. As you mentioned earlier, the whole world was watching at the time how the Philippines would respond and come back from the station as Typhoon Haiyan.
Yeah. The chaos of the coordination was, I think, unimaginable. And you have a lot of people from outside wanting to come in because they want to help. But the challenge there was if you have already a crisis in terms of your protocols, systems, people, the lack of staff complement, it was a huge challenge. And for me, it
Also,
was,
Atty, if I may point out, at that point in time, after the typhoon hit the Philippines, our communication channels were all down. It was a huge challenge, not just for government, but for everyone.
right, true. It took us, I think, more than 36 hours of no communication because all systems and lines were down. So it triggered government as well as private sector and other communities and civil society organizations, even academe, to think through what are the things that you need to put, what are the redundancies? Because when people were carrying cell phones was not the solution. We needed handheld radios. We needed a different setup to be able to respond to that magnitude of a disaster. So it was a bit tricky. And you all know very well that when you deal with several departments or agencies of government, coordination is a bit challenging. And you add there 171 cities and municipalities. You're talking about the mayors. You're talking about 14 governors from all the affected provinces. So how do you get everyone to come together? How do you bring in the private sector? Navigating the bureaucracy, it was making the tough decisions when no one else wanted to because they were scared to get fired. So that was one of the things that drove me to push myself to do better and to work harder.
Speaking of making decisions, Attorney, when you are faced with a fork on the people, what do you take into consideration in making that decision?
But usually I ask myself, what is the best outcome? Or what is the second best outcome? Is this a win-win situation? And what is the optimal choice? Consequences of my decision, who will be affected, and then will I be able to sleep at night with the choices that I will make? So usually I go through that process. And for the tougher decisions, what I do is usually I draw a line to constantly remind me of my limits, to remind me when not to cross that line, knowing that if I make this decision, if I do this, it's a point of no return. So far, it has served me well, and it has guided me in making the difficult choices, both at work as well as in life.
Good to crisis, not just the Philippines, but worldwide as well. Lessons from your experience during Yolanda that were applicable, not just in 2020, but as we continue to barrel through the COVID pandemic.
Yeah. First is preparation. There's a institute to preparation. But as you've mentioned, the world from a global standpoint, a regional standpoint, and the Philippines was, I think, caught off guard. The second is, if we have not prepared, how fast can we adjust, adapt, and execute? And you can see various countries of varying, I think, readiness, as well as availability of resources manage, right? So this is where the rubber hits the road, when you can see leaders from government, from private sector, from the academe, civil society come together and do something. And this is, how do we bring in our local governments also? How do we bring in our communities to come together? And the third one is to invest in the local government units. For disasters, we always say that they are the frontliners. They are the first responders. And we saw that. How do we help build their capacity in preparation for the next disaster, for the next pandemic? And what is more challenging, Bert, I think, is you're dealing with compound risks. The pandemic will not go away in the next few months. It'll be with us, I think, years from now. And guaranteed that there will be a typhoon, a flood, an earthquake. So how do you help local government units, the communities, and the people build that resilience to manage these compound risks? So those are some of the lessons that we have learned, and nothing beats community. And it's crucial that at every level, somebody is telling the public, communicating as candidly as possible in a language that is understood by the people. Because at the end of the day, we need to be confident and to trust that our government and our leaders are working for us.
That's true. I have to agree with that. Pandemic, well, at least in the Philippines, we did not understand what the situation was, what the crisis is about, what the virus really was about, and the very technical terms that our friends in the medical community were giving us were not really very helpful in the beginning, because ordinary Filipinos did not understand things. So there was a challenge to simplify. So I would have to agree with you that in communication in particular, it has to be understood by everyone in the society. So everyone will have to respond accordingly. By the way, attorney, being an expert yourself, how much can a local government unit, for example, or a community prepare for something as huge as a pandemic or Typhoon Haiyan, for instance? Because that's the next conversation now. That's the next level of conversation. We say it is best to be prepared all the time, but how far and how much should we really prepare?
Yeah. And we see this not just in the Philippines. Go to Vietnam, Myanmar, Indonesia, which are also equally disaster prone. And you can see the bulk of the preparation is not just at the national government, because national government is very far when something hits the ground. So it's the local government and the communities. As basic as training, what are the things that you need to do, making sure that families at the household level are ready. And it also helps if you have a disciplined and a dedicated local government unit and a barangay. And in this pandemic, same with Yolanda, we have seen a few and a few governors shine because they prepared, because they had the foresight to imagine what will happen when a disaster hits. Same with the pandemic. You can see a few standing out, not because they're doing extraordinary things, they're doing ordinary work, but they're doing it well. They're leveraging on private sector, on civil society, on volunteers. They're not scared to share that responsibility, the burden, as well as the power also to do something. In Haiyan, I could still recall na I was waiting because I was at the national government working with Senator Lacson, worried because 3 months into the whole thing, I never heard our governor or mayors from Cebu City picking up the phone calling that they need help. So I was a bit worried. And then I realized when the Cebu governor started presenting, as well as some of the mayors, I knew that everything was under control because they did not need national government. They were leveraging on the academe, the private sector there, helping out each other, trying to, instead of send resources to Tacloban, to other affected areas, Cebu first. It's heartwarming to see that. And I hope that in this pandemic, we will continue to do the same or build on the lessons that we have learned from previous disasters.
Right? We should. I like the word that you said earlier, foresight, because I think that's what many lack. Many
True.
people lack the ability to look ahead, way ahead, and prepare for something. But realistically, attorney, having worked for both government and the private sector as well, how much can we, where do we draw the balance? Because even if we call for cooperation, even if we call for, well, there will always be priorities in different levels of government, right? And there will always be personal agenda. Um, Lessons from there.
Yeah. Crucial to identify priorities. You hit the nail on the head by saying that limited resources, but we need a lot of things to be done quickly. So prioritizing who are the key people that need to be assisted first. What are some of the businesses or sectors or industries that you want to prioritize? Because guaranteed, you can't do everything. So one is prioritization. Second is also looking at the sources, the foresight also of doing risk financing and transferring some of these risks, leveraging on the available resources, not just at the national government level. What are the resources out there at the domestic corporate level, as well as the different international organizations and partners? And then is trying to get everyone on board in terms of the real situation, because our government usually has this style of just keeping the issues among themselves, right? Because for them, it's political suicide. But here, in a crisis, in a disaster, the more you share what is happening, what are the challenges, how is government trying to address this, and then managing expectations, it will go a long way. And I'm sure people will understand.
And I'd like to believe the more you share, the more the real experts can share also their expertise and respond to the situation. By the way, philosophy, law school, and then government. What was it? The natural transition for you?
I think it was, and to some extent, there were some surprises along the way because you're not dealt thing most of the time, right? And the lesson that I have learned is that embrace every opportunity and make the most out of it. Learn from it. And this is how I embrace the whole disaster risk management field. And to all the people out there, especially women who are looking for career shift, this is a good opportunity because guaranteed next to taxes, there will always be disasters and pandemics. So it's a very new field that there are still limited experts in. So it's not too late to shift careers. Women thrive. You've mentioned about Women's Day, Women's Month. It's a career where women thrive because I think women are even tempered, even keeled, objective. And in a crisis, most of the women do not panic. So it's something worth exploring also.
Speaking of which, the industries that you belong in or belong to, the legal profession, even government, very competitive and very demanding. Has gender been an issue to you as far as your endeavors in making were concerned?
In terms of getting an opportunity, getting your foot in the door or having a seat at the table, yes, because I often find myself alone in a room of 10 people or in a table, I could see one or two women surrounded by a lot of big burly guys and usually older men. And the challenge there has always been, how do you get your message across? How do you get them to take you seriously? And for the women who came before us, who paved the way for us to get here, I think they've done a good job. But the challenge now is, how do I also continue to pave the way for other women who will come after me? Because for sure, in meetings, in discussions, gender plays a role. But the challenge now is, will you let it affect you? And I always find myself putting my best foot forward and deciding, like any person would decide in a certain situation, to get the best outcome.
Nice, very nice. How much did your experience or background in law in your current career now?
Both in government and here at the World Bank plays a lot of role in terms of looking at policies, understanding frameworks and policies or laws of certain countries, not just in the Philippines, understanding organizational structures, and how do you work around those structures to get things done. So they say that in government and even with lawyers, right, they muddle the issue because they put in a lot of jargons there. And for me, I've learned that if you're a lawyer and you're able to simplify your message and get it across, it helps letting the other person at the other end of the table say yes quickly and close the deal. So also getting things done by looking at this legal provisions, making sure that assistance and help to the communities as well as the happen, get there quickly.
The technicalities, I like to believe.
Yes. And we all know that there's a lot, right? Even in this pandemic, the guidelines of the interagency task force is a lot, right? So how do you translate that in a language that is understood by many so that things will move? So that's how I'm trying to figure out and use my legal background to be able to untangle some of these knots.
Any plans of working full-time in law in the future?
If I get an opportunity, yeah. I've tried doing cases, have a law firm for a while. My dad's a lawyer, so he has a firm there also waiting for me. But for now, I'm enjoying dealing with disasters, both at the national level as well as in the regional and global arena.
Attorney, they say that when society invests in women, when we invest in women, we actually invest in societies and the communities we live in. Do you agree with that?
I do, yeah. So I think if you put $1 more or 100 peso more for women, like for mothers, for young kids, for young women, for women teachers, you get a long way, because these are the people who in society will help mold young men, young boys to be able to be more productive and to have these values that are expected. And I think that for the longest time, the limited investment in women has been very glaring. It's only now that you are seeing women in sports, women in movies getting their worth. So I hope that companies as well as government will put dollars and cents more and in that line item for women empowerment.
The outstanding young man of the Philippines for 2020, what?
It's both a responsibility, a challenge, as well as a burden. It's flattering to be awarded and to be in that elite roster of awardees or honorees who came before me. When you look at it, it's scary, it's daunting. But my realization now is a challenge to do better, to help encourage people to dream bigger and live to fulfill those dreams. I think to aim higher. And it's more challenging now that we're in a very volatile, ambiguous, as well as complex situation where we have pandemics, crisis left and right, disasters. So how do you encourage people to stay strong, to hang on, and to continue pursuing their dreams? So for me, I think it's something that I want to share with every young girl, with every young Filipino woman who wants to strive hard also. And one day say, I want to be like her and to do well in my field. to continue pursuing and helping out both the community, Cebu, as well as the country in general.
What kind of pressure does that put on you, being a role model to young women who might want to follow in your footsteps, but a role model to every young Filipino?
It's scary. It's both humbling as well as scary because you know that you're not allowed to make so many mistakes because people are looking up at you. And one thing I've learned also is that if you fail at something, you shouldn't be scared. You need to show that you're willing to pick yourself up, learn from the mistakes, as well as pursue whatever you need to do. But it's crazy scary to keep on thinking that you're a role model. But what I do every day is that do my best, do ordinary things extraordinarily well, as much as I can, and then share some of these experiences to help mentor young women as well as young girls who are also finding their way.
Finally, Attorney, I might be asking you to look at a crystal ball at this point in time, but how do you see the Philippines, let's say, a year for the rest of 2021 at least?
From a perspective of bouncing back, rest of 2021, I think we will continue the grind, the challenge of having to figure out the vaccination protocols, the program, restarting the economy, and trying to find ways to save some of the sectors and industries. But overall, if we continue to just push hard and put our foundations in place, put in the systems, do the work, and not do the shortcuts. But honest assessment, we will be one of the few countries who will be lagging behind. And this has been the forecast by most of the development partners. But the challenge right now is how do we manage to surpass of these forecasts, right? We can do better. We still have, I think, 8 to 10 months to do this. So let's all work together and find a way to be able to manage this crisis and prepare for other shocks, because I think what will derail us is typhoons or the earthquakes that will come our way when June to December hits, right? And we all know that this will happen. So we need to do a good job to prepare because we don't want also to be caught off guard when this happens.
Very nice advice. Thank you very much, Attorney Lesley of the World Bank, Asian Institute of Management. And thank you so much for the expertise you've shared with us today and for sharing life lessons as well as your life in general. Happy International Women's Month to you. Thank you so much for joining Power Women.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you to the Freeman. And it's always a pleasure to come home to Cebu in terms of this conversation. And thank you to all the women out there who are watching and listening. Truly happy to be part of this conversation.
We hope to see you home one of these days, Attorney.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. This is Season 4.